Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on World Mental Health Day. My name is Nerissa Almeida Santimano. I work in the field of public health, and it's my pleasure to host this session today. This webinar is being organized by volunteers of the Save Mollem movement in Goa. In addition to calling upon our civic duties as citizens, one of the goals of this People's Campaign is also to share knowledge and raise awareness of the various ways that our lives and health are intertwined with the natural world. And what better occasion than World Mental Health Day to bring you a discussion on mental health and the environment. 1 in 7 people in India are affected or were affected in 2017 by estimates by mental disorders of varying severity. That's how common it is. Our mental health is just like physical health, in the sense that everyone has it, everyone's affected by it, and we all need to protect it. So today we bring you an esteemed panel of speakers to deepen our understanding of the links between mental health and the natural environment. Let me introduce our speakers then. Professor Vikram Patel is the Pershing Square Professor of Global Health and Wellcome Trust Principal Researcher, Fellow at the Harvard Medical School. He co-leads the Global Mental Health at Harvard initiative. His work has focused on the burden of mental health problems, their association with social disadvantage, and the use of community resources for prevention and treatment. He is a fellow of the UK's Academy of Medical Sciences and has served on the committee which drafted India's first national mental health policy, and also on the WHO high-level independent commission for non-communicable diseases. He is a co-founder of the Movement of Global Mental Health, the Centre for Global Mental Health at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, the Mental Health Innovations Network, and Sangath, an Indian NGO, which won the WHO Public Health Champion of India Prize. He's also been awarded numerously and was listed in the Time magazine's 100 Most Influential Persons of the Year in 2015. Our next speaker, Dr. Debarati Mukherjee, is an Inspire Faculty Fellow at the Indian Institute of Public Health, Bangalore campus. She completed her PhD in cell biology from Purdue University, USA, and was trained in the neurobiology of autism at the National Center for Biological Sciences, also Bangalore, India, funded by the prestigious DBT Wellcome Trust India Alliance Early Career Fellowship. Her primary research interest is in early childhood development. In collaboration with Vikram and his team at Sangath and other national and international partners, she has contributed to the development and validation of tablet-based gamified assessments of cognitive, fine motor, and social development of preschool children in India. She was also part of a team that demonstrated for the first time in India that green spaces in the vicinity of people's homes can protect against adverse mental health conditions such as major depression. Today, she will talk to us about this study, and we welcome her on the panel. Finally, also with us today is Deepti Sharma. She's an animator and illustrator based in Goa and cares deeply about conservation and has been using her work for conservation communication. She's also an advocate for mental health and has been working on mental health projects like the Man Mela project at Quicksand Design Studio in collaboration with Sangath. Firstly, thank you all for joining us today, for your time, your very precious time. And I'd like to go straight to Deepti, if I may, and invite you, Deepti, to start us off with your lived experience perspective on how the natural environment has impacted you personally.
Thank you, Nerissa. Hi, everyone. Like Nerissa said, I'm an animator and illustrator, and I have been based in Goa for more than a year now, and I've never felt more at home than I do over here. And I think it's primarily because of how close I am to nature living here. I was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder and depression 5 years ago, and while I am doing better, my mental health is something I have to constantly manage. I've been in therapy and I'm also on medication. And while there is no substitute for proper mental health care, there is definitely a positive impact that nature has on you. Like being close to the environment cannot magically close my mental illness, but it can create a very it can create an environment where I can, take care of myself and support myself to my best ability. It brings a quality of beauty to my life. It helps me slow down. Like a few days ago, I've been having a couple of tough months. Like I'm sure a lot of us have, with the pandemic. And I went on a hike with my friend, and I felt completely at peace. And I think I've always felt that way about the environment and trees. I think they're wonderful, solid, wise creatures, and they teach you so much. And I've been incredibly lucky to be so close to nature here. The village I live in, the river is close by. It's got beautiful mangrove coasts, and I think all of that just like it just grounds you, which is incredible. And someone recently we were having a discussion with various people of the Mole campaign, and someone who's been living in Goa all their life mentioned that 20 years ago, the forests were right there, and now the human settlements have like pushed them back into smaller pockets. So you have to like drive, and people like us in Goa are incredibly lucky that we still have forests so close to our backyard. And I think nature just helps put things in perspective. It grounds you, um, and whenever that connection is fractured, I feel like your mental health is impacted. And I would say, like, for the past few years, for example, I have been, like a lot of other people I know, experiencing climate anxiety. And the world is in a space where we're ruled by leaders who are unfortunately not putting environment at the focus. And we've been seeing this happen, like especially in the last year, with the wildfires in Australia, and what's happening in the US, the oil spill which happened recently. The Arctic recorded the highest ever temperature, and even closer to home, the last year has been disheartening with the EIA draft and the coal block auctions and all the forests under attack, be it the Bang Valley or closer home here in Mole. And I personally firmly believe that humans are supposed to have we're supposed to exist in balance with nature. And when that balance is disturbed, we all tend to experience a deep sense of grief for things we have lost or what we stand to lose. And I have been feeling that. I've been feeling this sense of dread because our future and our planet's future is uncertain. And that definitely has an impact on my mental health. What has helped me personally, though, is trying to look at it from a perspective of hope a little bit, which I've found a lot with the Mole campaign. Like Nandini, who is part of the campaign, says, we must do what we can for nature with love because we love the environment so much. And that's definitely helped me. It's been like a support group of sorts also, where we do experience hopelessness, we do experience anger, but then we like convert that to, okay, what can we do? And um and that definitely brings a lot of relief to the anxiety I experience. And in general, also, like, the environment is just wonderful and giving, and there's nothing like unrestrained nature which is around you. And we're so lucky to have forests like Mole close to us.
Thank you so much for that, Deepti. That's such an interesting perspective. It's quite rare, actually, to have people speak openly about the mental ill health that they experience, and I have to commend you for doing that. As Brene Brown puts it, we can choose courage or we can choose comfort, but we can't have both, not at the same time. And that was both courageous and vulnerable at the same time. And in more ways than one, you've shown already great leadership. So I really thank you for coming out with that statement and starting us off in this discussion. Vikram, I hope you don't mind me if I bring you in at this point. Before we go any further, there are so many definitions, thrown about health. The most well-known, perhaps one by the WHO back in 1948, includes mental health, physical health, and social well-being as well, not merely the absence of disease. Yet, when we see things like, the Government of India National Action Plan for Climate Change and Human Health, so heavily, all of these plans, they focus on the physical aspects of human health. But what really is mental well-being?
Nerissa, thank you so much for organizing this webinar. Firstly, it's such a pleasure to be connected to so many people, mostly my son's friends that are actually connected to this webinar. So big shout out to all of you. It's fabulous to see young people in Goa, which is of course part my home. So completely seized by issues to do with our planet, with our climate, and of course today being World Mental Health Day with mental health. I'm joining you today from a very different part of the world. I'm at Cape Cod in the US, and I can tell you, Deepti, you're absolutely right. To be out in the environment, to be out in nature is a powerful tonic. I've spent a week cooped up in my apartment in Boston, and luckily I have friends who have a home at the Cape, which is the local equivalent of Goa, really. And it just by being here outdoors is in itself an enormous tonic for my mental health. I have to say, during the pandemic, like you, I was in Goa with my family, and I can just remember there's a river in front of our home in our village, and just the pleasure of waking up in the morning and seeing all the incredible variety of birds and the river in front of our home, and taking our dog for a walk in the village. That's kept me sane for the last 7 or 8 months, because God knows there's so much going on in India that can drive anyone spare. And so you're absolutely right, Deepti, and I also wanted to congratulate you on your courage to come out and speak, because I think that's the most powerful way that we can address the stigma, the shame around mental health problems, is simply by talking about it. It just completely, humanizes the experience. And so that takes me to your question, Nerissa. The truth is the World Health Organization does have this extremely broad and all-embracing definition, but the truth is that nobody actually sees mental health that way. Forget about the exclusion of mental health from when we conversations about health. The truth is that when people hear the word mental health, for most people, what they really think about is mental illness. And this is in large part the result of the kind of very strong biomedical orientation that has dominated all conversations about health, not just mental health. When people talk about health, they don't really refer to something that is precious and important to everyone. They really are using that as a euphemism for diseases and biomedical conditions that are the domain of the biomedical profession. And unfortunately, this is also true of mental health. And I think we have to really combat that, because that is not what health is. Health is not the business of doctors and nurses. Health is the business of each and every one of us. And for me, mental health, in the way the World Health Organization has defined it, in fact, you described health, but actually, let me just remind us what mental health is more specifically. And I'm going to read out exactly what the World Health Organization describes mental health. It's a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of everyday life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. I can't imagine a more broader and all-embracing definition than that. It's not about not having a mental illness. It's a much more positive statement. It's about being able to connect with yourself and people around you and your environment in a way which is productive and fruitful. In other words, Nerissa, I would say that mental health is our greatest personal asset. I mean, if you think of this broad definition and you think about what really matters to each of us, it's not, the color of our hair or how tall or short we are. It's really all these different characteristics that are included in the definition of mental health. It's important to us every single moment of our lives. And I think, therefore, it really means that each and every one of us is concerned with protecting our mental health, promoting our mental health, and importantly, also reaching out to others in our community to do the same.
Thank you. And if I may, I think there's a couple of other sort of aspects that I wanted to bring out further as well, is perhaps something that mental health shares with physical ill health, or when we talk about diseases and disorders, both of the mind and the body. something else that's not talked about often is the aspect of quality of life whilst you're living with it, and that's shared both, physical health as well as mental health. I'd say, and the other thing is, you've talked about what it means to us as an asset for individuals, and also perhaps there's an angle where there is a mental well-being of the population, of the public at large, of communities. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course there is. I think it's mental health is an interest. Just, I think it's unlike physical health. It's not just a private experience. If you live in a community, in a population in which there's a heightened level of mental distress, as we currently do in many, many parts of the world. I mean, the two countries I live in, the US and India, are riven not only by climate change and issues to do with planetary health, but also, let's be honest, there's a profound degree of polarization and hate that is spreading in a terrible way in both countries. This affects our mental health too, because when there is hate in our community, then effectively there is a rising sense of fear, of uncertainty about the future. And that, combined with uncertainty about the climate, and of course, on top of all of that, the pandemic, the mental health of others also affects our own mental health. So we should be concerned with population mental health as much as our own personal mental health.
Sorry, I'm getting used to the mute unmute business. With that in mind, Debarati, if I could bring you in at this point, just to start drawing out for us the links and the mechanisms in which, more specifically, the natural world, or even the lack of it, can impact our mental health.
Yeah, sure. And let me also begin by thanking you, Nerissa. This is this is a first for me. This is the first time I'm actually presenting in a webinar, so I'm very excited. So thank you for the opportunity, and it's really great to see so many people join in on World Mental Health Day. In response to your question, there is actually a very substantial body of literature that is starting to reveal the value of natural surroundings and the experience of nature on mental well-being. It was very interesting to hear perspectives from Deepti and Vikram about how these natural surroundings has been a tonic to their mental health, because that's pretty much what the literature says. So the literature has actually defined mental health in many different ways, both in terms of mental well-being as well as in terms of disorders. There are, studies that have shown that experience of nature improves your cognitive functioning. So, for example, it helps you, it improves attention, cognitive flexibility, working memory. There are also studies that have shown improvements in emotional well-being, probably because it creates these avenues of social interactions and a sense of cohesion in the society. There have been many studies that have focused on mental disorders such as depression and anxiety. And all of them point to the fact that experience of nature can actually reduce your feelings of loneliness, helplessness, feelings of depression. And interestingly, some studies have also shown that the effects of green spaces and blue spaces, which are basically water bodies, on mental health is actually greater in the most disadvantaged sections of society compared to those who are more privileged, because the idea is those who are more privileged already have access to high quality green spaces, but that may not always be true for those who live in slums or the fringes of society. There's another body of literature which is the more worrying trend, that the quality and quantity of time that we are spending in nature, our contact with nature, is actually progressively decreasing. The primary drivers is urbanization, more importantly, unplanned urbanization, and all the associated, lifestyle changes that come with it. For example, sedentary work as well as increased screen time. So the recommendations are very, very clear. You can't do away with cities because they are the drivers of, economic prosperity. That's what gives a lot of jobs to people. So you need to create plans to integrate natural surroundings in your city design. And then you need to basically provide opportunities for people to spend more time in these natural surroundings as against the built up, spaces that we typically live and work. And we need to take additional care to make these natural surroundings more available to the most disadvantaged sections, because they may be the ones who benefit most from it. So this is a very high level summary of what the evidence is. But in a nutshell, natural surroundings are basically a very important protective factor for our mental health.
Like, that's really, really interesting. You've covered so many different points on over there. It's almost, you could have a discussion almost on each one of those. I think from what you said, sort of as a recap, there's the unplanned urbanization and the increasing trend towards populations living in densely populated city type environments. You mentioned, I think, the impact of nature, not only spanning on our cognitive function, but also our emotional well-being. And then you mentioned also something about communities and how communities gel, and the cohesiveness of communities, and how that is also impacted by not just having green spaces or blue spaces around them, but the pace of change in these green spaces. That's really excellent. I wanted to ask if you could perhaps, did you mention, or could you elaborate a bit more about the study that you conducted at the green spaces in Delhi?
Yeah, so actually, most of the evidence that I've spoken about, they come from high-income countries, from the developed nations, and we do know that in the developed world, most of the cities are very planned. They spend so there's a lot of green space, there's a lot of wilderness, there's a lot of biodiversity in close proximity to where people live. The conditions in the developing nations, and specifically the low and middle income countries like India, are very different. Those of us who live here know that you need to travel an hour to go to a park which is large enough that it gives you a sense of restoration and peace and calm. When we tried to look at the evidence from these very different settings from high-income countries, we found that there was actually none. There was a study on mental health in individuals with existing chronic conditions, mostly cardiometabolic disorders. And there was data available on green spaces for these individuals. So we saw an opportunity in, coming up with the first study that looked at the impact of green spaces on major depression in individuals with chronic conditions. And I think Vikram mentioned, and you mentioned as well, that physical and mental health are interlinked. So those who already have a prior physical health condition are more likely to be depressed compared to the general population. And our results were actually very similar to what is seen elsewhere in the world, in spite of the fact that we don't have the level of green spaces that is existing in the more developed world. Basically, we found, so we looked at different aspects of green spaces. We looked at how far the nearest park is from an individual's home, what is the area of that park, how many total number of parks are available within a 1 kilometer radius, etc. And we found that while the trends were similar for all of these different factors, we found that the area of the park that is closest to your home has the most important association with an individual's depression status. So somebody who's living in an area which has a very small park close to them are 3 times more likely to have a diagnosed condition of depression compared to somebody who lives in an area which has the largest parks near their home. So that was basically the meat of the study. We looked at some mechanisms that may be, mediating this relationship. We didn't find, any significant results there, but we sort of posited that it could be due to their increased access to physical activity spaces, increased access to social interactions that may be driving this association.
So then essentially what you're saying is from the study is that actually it's not just about having a little bit of green space in bits and bobs and sort of fragmented, little lawns here and there, although that is a little bit of a relief. What your study is showing is that actually you have the larger spaces, the more pristine natural environments that are sort of kept as they were for centuries perhaps. Those are the ones, or even sort of larger parks, have a better or more of an impact on restoring and protecting people's mental well-being. Would any of the other panelists like to comment on that? Is that your experience from the rest of the literature, or even your personal experience? I know some of you have touched upon that right at the very start.
So, Debarati is exactly right. I will say, though, that, when we talk of green spaces, we don't only mean spaces that are historically green. We also talk about man-made green spaces. So I think in urban environments, I think the green spaces she's referring to also includes things like parks. And so I think we should be clear that urban environments are in and of themselves actually very good for people. For example, for many, many young Indians, for example, being able to escape from very orthodox and extremely difficult social worlds of rural India, particularly for young people, is actually a very positive experience. And so we should be careful that we don't conflate urban environments with being bad for your mental health. I don't think that that is true. But we do need to recognize that urban environments need to also have and embrace an environmental spirit, which includes parks. It includes, we're very lucky in Goa, right? I mean, we have just the sea that gives us such a massive buffer. And so I think that just walking on the beach is another example for Panjim, for example, for people to be able to get away. And I think anyone who lives in Panjim will know what a pleasure that is in terms of unwinding at the end of the day. So let's be clear about that. The other thing I want to just say, when we talk of green spaces, I think we need to see this in the broader context of the physical environment that we live in. For example, for many, many people living around filth, especially for poor people in our country who live in slums where there is open sewage, where there is very high levels of water and air pollution. I think we should be very careful not to make this purely about national parks and about parks and so on. There's also another side, which is fundamental basic rights to living in an environment that is hygienic, that is safe, that has adequate sanitation. To me, this is part of the same continuum. If we live in a society which doesn't respect the basic rights of access to clean water and clean air, then I think we're also going to live in a society that doesn't value trees and forests. And I think we must see this as part of a bigger picture around climate change and planetary health.
I think, thank you for bringing that in, Vikram. You're spot on about, we do have to have a balanced conversation about urbanization, the urban world. Sort of, it brings other positive experiences, and also, just like everything else, has its some disadvantages, which we have to learn to cope and manage as well. It's not like nothing can be done about that. So that's really, really useful. Deepti, I wanted to just come back to you after that, and because throughout my practice of public health programs, something I've learned is that individuals and communities' experiences, their personal experiences, are a type of expertise in itself. And so I just wanted to check back in with you as you're sharing your lay perspective with us. Does this evidence-based chime with your lived experience then?
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Definitely, I feel like I related to a lot of what Vikram shared and what Debarati shared. For example, I'd like to pick up on what Debarati spoke about, green spaces and their impact on your health. So before I moved to Goa, I lived in Mumbai, and I remember with other things, I feel like the space I lived in, I did not have a lot of space to unwind and just, I don't know, just create being here versus being where I was earlier. Being here definitely creates a more conducive environment for me to take care of myself. And again, I found a lot of peace in the green spaces within Mumbai. For example, like Bandra is beautiful and green. There's so many trees, and I feel like, the days I would go to meet the trees in Bandra, I would feel rejuvenated and good to go for the rest of the day. And definitely, I understand that, like Vikram pointed out, cities are important spaces, and in the end, mental health is a complex dance, and there's a whole bunch of things at play which contribute to your mental health being good or not as good. But I deeply resonated with what Debarati spoke about. The how pristine the green space is around you also definitely impacts how you feel about it. Like, nature is resilient, and it exists even in concrete jungles, and it offers you comfort even there. But there is definitely nothing like being able to go to a forest, or being able to go for a hike or something. And like Vikram, Dr. Vikram rightly said, it's about everyone having that basic right of a good, like, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the words, but just having like proper sanitation, proper, like, green spaces shouldn't be something which only privileged people exist. It should be something which everybody should have access to. Everybody should have access to a clean environment, and it'll definitely have. I mean, it has had, in my experience, a good impact on my mental health.
I think what you were sort of trying to touch upon there is the equal opportunity for people and communities to have access to a decent amount of nature, doors, or sort of relationship with nature. So it mustn't be that only some of us who are slightly more privileged or have better, or live in more affluent areas, have better looking areas, more greenery and treetop coverage, etc. It needs to be made accessible to everybody. And when we're planning our environments, our urban environments, or even sort of making developments to rural environments, it's the people that we consult with, and then we sort of make sure that everyone has equal opportunity or equity.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Yeah.
Definitely. Coming to the bit where you spoke about expertise, honestly, I can only talk about what has worked for me and what has worked for me in managing my own mental health well. And I have found that, on difficult days, just to walk where I get to meet some trees can have a really good impact on how I end up feeling towards the end of the day. And I do have to put in the work in, taking care of my mental health. But nature just creates that conducive environment for you. It definitely calms you down. And I don't know if I'm an expert or anything or not, but what both Dr. Vikram and Debarati touched upon definitely reflects on how I experience managing my own mental health.
Thank you. Debarati, just on that point, we've talked about we've mentioned depression, you've mentioned anxiety. What are the other common or more serious mental disorders that are linked by the evidence with degradation of natural environments and with an urban environment that is typically devoid of nature?
Mm-hmm. So one line of thought that I would like to pick up on is the feeling of calm. So there's a lot of literature on stress and green spaces and natural surroundings. And the great thing about stress is that you can ask people, are you feeling more calm after your experience in nature? And that self-report. But there's also, this biomarker, a physiological marker of stress, which is the stress hormone cortisol. And the difference between measuring cortisol and self-report is that cortisol is way more objective. And there are a few studies that have shown that once you have taken a walk in a natural environment versus having taken a walk, let's say, beside a busy highway, and then, measured your cortisol levels, or sometimes, your decrease in cortisol levels pre and post your walk. The literature does show that your cortisol levels do go down more if you take a walk in natural environments. And that's true for both adults and children. So that's, I felt, quite an interesting bit.
That is such an interesting point, actually, because when I think back to where I live or lived in Goa, I would observe, and it was a very good habit. In fact, I thought I could learn from a lot of these people who would go out on the evening walks or very early in the morning, right by Miramar, the road on the pavement, sort of, religiously doing their morning and the evening walk. And that's such an important point that you make about the quality of the environment and your surrounding, even when you are religiously taking your, 15-minute or half an hour exercise every day. That's such an interesting point.
Yeah, and actually, there's also studies which have looked at physical activity, benefits of physical activity in natural environments versus built-up environments, like, for example, within a gym. And it looks like at least the mental effects of physical activity, because physical activity is also something that improves your mood, right? In some cases. So your upliftment, your feelings of happiness, accomplishment, that's actually more likely to happen in natural environments than when you exercise in a gym. And then there is another point, which another aspect of mental health, which has been looked at other than depression and stress, and that's attentional disorders. And in children, it's manifested in a disorder called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. And people have found that when children are exposed to more green environments, more natural surroundings, then their symptoms can be lowered. So if the intervention is, in a natural surrounding, then their attention improves compared to if the intervention is in a, inside of a built-up environment. And interestingly, there's a theory called attention restoration theory that has been put forward to sort of explain the mechanism by which nature may have these beneficial effects on attention. And what this theory basically says is that nature helps you, switch to a diffuse mode of attention. And this is the mode when you are not really paying attention to anything in particular, and as against directed attention, which is, where you have to consciously make an effort to orient your attention to a task that you need to complete. So what is known is that when you are in this directed attention mode, then it needs a lot of mental resources. A lot of cognitive resources are directed towards this conscious effort of constantly reorienting yourself to the work you need to do. And over time, these resources get depleted. And the way to sort of replenish these resources is to actually switch to a diffuse mode, where you're not actually thinking of your task, but generally orienting to things that attract your attention naturally. And natural environments are really good in helping you switch to that diffuse mode. And therefore, attention post experience of nature is better than outside nature. So that's another area that has received a little bit of attention, maybe after depression.
That's excellent learning. I don't know how the rest of the panel feel, but I mean, that's such an interesting point as well about so many of us lead quite sedentary sort of lifestyles, 8 hours, 10 hours working with our computers at a desk. And then when we think about taking a break, what do? We'll switch on the TV, or, have a phone call with someone and chat, or maybe take a brief walk along, quite often a highway, like I've mentioned before. But everything that you've said just now just brings such a valuable perspective, I think, for us to even evaluate those types of rest activities and break activities, and what we can do to better restore our attention and our mind space after a hard day's worth of work.
Mm-hmm.
Would anyone else like to comment on that before sort of I move on? Vikram, I'll come back to you with a question again.
Well, I just want to say I learned something from Debarati that completely aligns with my own personal experience, that I've been a lifelong swimmer. And one of the great things about living in Goa is that you can swim round the year in one of the wonderful public pools. I developed swimmer shoulder about 5 or 7 years ago now. And so for a year, I had to stop swimming. And I had to get my fix of exercise. So I started going to a gym. And I have to say, the experience was pretty awful. To be quite honest, I can now look back, Debarati, thanks for that piece of knowledge, which I had not realized has been empirically studied, that going to an indoor place and, pounding away on some stupid machine when no one looks at anybody else, and it's and compares, and go to the Kampal pool and swim in the big outdoors near the river. It was just the contrast that it had on my mental health, leave aside my physical health, was so remarkable. And now there is obviously science explaining why that might be the case.
Awesome. So then, Vikram, I then wanted to move us on. I'm just keeping an eye on time. We've got about 15 to 18 minutes left of the webinar. I wanted to ask you, what about the pace of change then? The change that we're experiencing within our own communities, within the state, within our countries, and also globally. One to do with climate anxiety, as Deepti mentioned, sort of, issues to do with with environmental health. We're hearing so much about it on local media, on national media, but also along with that, what goes along with that is this pace of change within our communities. So, movement of where people used to live to new places of living, new types of housing, formation of new communities, the loss of old communities, loss of perhaps indigenous communities, place-based occupation. There's so much going on. This pace of change is so rapid. Surely that also then has an impact on how we feel, how much in control we feel of our surroundings, our physical health and our mental health. Is there something about that you could perhaps touch on or elaborate?
So I'll touch on this from my own personal observations. I won't say there's a very clear scientific foundation about this, but what I will say is that change is part and parcel of human society. And I think the question isn't so much whether the change is happening. Obviously, the change is very rapid in these days because of all the things you described, but whether people feel part of that change, whether they feel that they are involved with the decisions that are being made, that their needs, their priorities are being addressed, rather than what unfortunately is the most dominant form that change occurs, which is that change is thrust down on communities by very narrow vested interests. For example, let's consider in Goa the whole issue of mining. I think that is a great story there, of why, in fact, it isn't so much whether mining should occur or not, as much as have the people who are affected by mining been taken into account in conversations about whether they want mining or not, and if they do want mining, how do they want mining to actually sort of be conducted in their communities? Instead, the conversations are being run in Supreme Courts of India with all these expensive lawyers and etc. being flown in. And so it distances the social change from the people who are actually directly affected. And I think that lack of participatory engagement of our communities is a really, it's a huge symptom of the sickness of our times. And I see the same with the pandemic. The fact that the people of India were never consulted on any of the decisions, or the people of Goa were never consulted on any of the decisions that were thrust down on them by our different leaders. And I think that is a far more problematic situation than change itself. Change, if properly managed in a democratic way, with the engagement of communities, can actually be a very positive experience.
I'm really glad you made that point about participatory engagement. And that's something I've been, in organizing this webinar as well, we've tried to do right throughout this webinar is make the point that people are also experts themselves. And it is absolutely not only just their right, but absolutely worth and valuable sort of to consult them. It not just improves the process and the outcome, but in business terms you get buy-in, etc., etc. But also from a community perspective, it empowers you. It sort of it keeps a sense of control with the people. And I know for a fact that feeling of a sense of control, of having agency, is absolutely crucial to one's mental health and mental well-being. And I think that's really, really important to mention. So if no one else, I mean, would anyone else on the panel would like to comment on that? So then swiftly, just keeping time in the corner of my eye, I wanted to ask all of you, what can we do to strengthen, protect, and restore our mental well-being as individuals and also as a community? So one, I think, please try and touch upon how nature can help us, but also what we as individuals can do. What action can we take? What are the steps that we must take to protect our mental health and restore it? I mean, feel free to take the stage, anyone at this point.
Yeah, so, coming from the perspective of early childhood development, I think one important thing we should do is protect the mental health of our children, because, their mental health has important repercussions on the mental health and physical health of themselves all through the life course. It is known that children who have mental health conditions tend to have poorer outcomes during adolescence and adulthood. So anything we can do to protect their mental health, and we now know that green spaces and natural surroundings is a protective factor. We must bring it in. We must encourage children to go outdoors and play. We must increase their contact with nature. We must increase, bonding, social cohesion among children, and then hopefully be able to reap those benefits through the life course. I think that's something we tend to forget. We forget children in all of these discussions, but they actually are our future, and we must do everything we can to protect them and their mental health.
Thank you, Debarati. Vikram, Deepti, your opportunity to pitch in here with some recommendations.
Yeah, I would, building on what Debarati mentioned, I feel like to secure a future for our children, I think, putting the planet in focus and putting the environment in focus is so important, because I have personally experienced a lot of people of my age group have, like, a lot of us feel very disillusioned and like really uncertain about our future, and that definitely impacts our mental health, and a lot of this uncertainty is because, like, we don't know what's happening with the climate change is no longer just like the slow moving climate change. It feels like a full blown emergency, and like bringing that into focus, bringing our connection with the environment back into focus is definitely going to have a positive impact on our mental health. Apart from that, what personally works for me is just taking some time for myself, being more in touch with my needs, and building a sense of connection with myself, the people around me, and my environment, because that definitely grounds me and like makes sure that I can take care of myself and my health.
So I'll just build on that. I completely agree with what Deepti said, and I want to add just one more thing, which is being engaged with something that feels purposeful and meaningful in your life. I think sometimes what we can feel overwhelmed by is the enormity of the challenge. And so if we look at climate change as an example, we can feel utterly and totally helpless as we see governments around the world squabbling with each other while the planet is gradually going underwater or burning up. So instead, we could be involved with the sorts of things like the Save Mollem campaign. I think it's a terrific example of local action to try and preserve and do things in a local way, even if we cannot necessarily influence the bigger structural forces that are affecting our climate, because otherwise you feel helpless and paralyzed with, my God, there's nothing I can do. So being involved with community action, I think, is a very powerful way to feel good about yourself. And I want to just remind our listeners, one of the longest standing public health studies was one that the Harvard University began in about 80 years ago, that was looking at what predicted a long and healthy life. They recruited a bunch of men. Of course, in those days, you only studied men. That was another problem of those times. But anyway, and they looked at all the, the predictors that of lifestyle and genes and so on that predicted a long and healthy life. And it turns out that it wasn't your genes or how much wealth you had, but actually the quality of your relationships, both the relationships that you had with an inner circle of people that you knew, but also the relationships you had with the community in which you lived, that actually predicted how long and a healthy life you'd lead. And I think there is a connect between that and the broader conversations we're having today with the environment.
Absolutely. In fact, Vikram, you've taken the next question out, away from me and sort of addressed it in the comments you just made. One of the questions that came in from the public was, from a mental health point of view, how does it benefit us in terms of, in terms of us getting involved in such a campaign? I think you've just touched upon that. Would you like to add anything further to that?
Well, actually, I am not direct. I think it's great, and I'd love to. I wonder if there's any chance of someone who's involved with the campaign to actually speak from their lived experience.
We've got about 8 minutes left, so I'll reserve my sort of closing comments and invite at this point. Maybe let me see who's on the call. I'm sure some of our volunteers and colleagues are on there.
Could I meanwhile chime in a little bit? I feel like I've been a part of the campaign for some time in like whatever small way I can be, and I feel like they have, like, being a part of the campaign and helping out in whatever way I can. And my ways are limited, right? Like, I'm an illustrator, so I've been helping out a little bit with like creating infographics, etc. And those are really small things, but what the other people at the campaign have constantly reminded me is that this is a big battle and this is a long battle. So what we can do is just pick like small things and do them with love and care, and do them only because we deeply care about these forests. And they definitely have transformed a lot of the hopelessness I was experiencing to hope, because I see all these other wonderful people around me. I feel less alone in feeling this way. I feel all these other wonderful people doing things for the campaign, and I feel like the way this campaign has been structured, it's so action oriented. In the beginning, when I was new to it, I was experiencing a lot of anger and a lot of bitterness, and that was obviously affecting my mental health as well. But this campaign has been so action oriented. Nobody wastes time on hating on anyone. Instead, they're like, all right, what can we do? And that brings a lot of hope. And my favorite of it all is Nandini, who's part of the campaign, says, hey, we're gonna save the earth with 8 hours of sleep. So like, there is a big focus on your mental health. That is taking care of yourself, and there's a lot of taking care of each other which is happening. Breaks are encouraged. You do what you can. You take care of yourself when you need to. Somebody else will step in. You're not alone. And I feel like that definitely has had a really positive impact on my mental health and how I have been coping with climate anxiety. And the Mollem campaign has been invaluable in that. It's really like led to a big shift of perspective for me and like given me a lot of hope personally.
Thank you very Deepti. I've actually invited a couple of colleagues that I can see on the participant list to sort of unmute and say some comments or make some comments. I don't know if they will sort of accept that invitation, but feel free to do so. So you'll know who you are when if you've received my unmute request. I'm just going to check for further questions from the public. Hold on a second. We've got some. I think we've touched on most of them. Some of them came in, about COVID and lockdown and the impact of that. But I think Vikram, you mentioned about that, and also we've talked so much about the natural environment and also about getting involved from the campaign's point of view. I think just bearing in mind everyone's time, we've got 4 minutes left. So what I think I'm going to do is move on to our closing remarks. And, I know we can carry on this conversation on the social media platforms. There's Twitter, there's a Twitter post, there's a Instagram post, there's a Facebook post as well. And of course, if you want to contact us directly where you have our contact details, feel free to do so. So before taking any further time from our speakers today and also our audience, I'd just like to move on to closing remarks. So never before, has our mental health been at the forefront of our minds in such a way and in such a scale than the past few months. It's caused enormous stress, anxiety, and has taken such a toll upon our mental well-being. But at the same time, as some of you have mentioned, there is still hope, in these action-orientated movements and our relationships and community work and social work that we can find ourselves involved in or get involved in if we haven't already. We've heard today about how, being around nature and including volunteering to protect nature can improve our mood, reduce our stress, improve our physical health, and also our confidence and our self-esteem. And I can say that I've observed that within myself, but also amongst my colleagues who are involved in the campaign, the youth that I've seen, people who are fresh out of college, who haven't done much public speaking, taking up to live feeds and sort of press conferences. It's just fantastic to witness the confidence that they're building and the courage that they're showing. And at a time when programs that are designed to improve people's mental well-being have started to formally prescribe spending time in nature as a treatment, it would really feel or be a true misstep to leave ourselves in a deficit of such a valuable resource on which we ultimately depend. So with that, I think I'll call it a day. We'll call it an end to this session. I hope everyone has found it useful and valuable. I hope people have learned at least one new point from it. Our sincere gratitude to all of our panelists for their time this evening, who have all juggled other events, some really major events, including, I know Professor Patel, Vikram, had an engagement or still has an engagement with the WHO, and others like Debarati, who have taken their time away from families to make this session possible on a weekend for all of us. So our sincere gratitude to all of you. And to our audience, I thank you for joining us, engaging with the session, your comments beforehand, during the session. Remember to look after yourselves and look after each other. So thank you for now, and until next time, goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.